Hey, Plodcast listeners, thanks again for tuning in to another week with Pastor Wilson. Canon Press didn't want those of you who only chew your information through the ears to miss out on Pastor Wilson's blog and Mayblog. And so, the Blogcast was born. Every Monday and Wednesday, Pastor Wilson writes the meat and potato posts at his blog. Hours later, those posts will be released in audio form via the Blog and Mayblog podcast. The podcast is available almost everywhere podcasts are available. This includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube for ease of sharing. So, ease into a nice chair, take a sip from your Blog and Mayblog coffee cup, and enjoy listening to theology that bites back. Thanks.
Yes, God. God don't never change. He's God.
Welcome to the Plodcast. This is episode 103. 103, the Plodcast. I'm Douglas Wilson. Good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. So, as I'm recording this, you'll probably get this in a week or two. But as I'm recording this, the new Prime Minister of United Kingdom of the UK is a gent named Boris Johnson. Now, somebody might think that the fates are playing hardball with us. All of a sudden, the UK is being governed by sort of a larger-than-life cartoon character with orange hair who was born in New York City, and his name is not Donald Trump. Boris Johnson is, well, like Donald Trump. He's standing over there with the conservatives and talks a conservative game and refers to his affection for the Conservative Party, but he's not your grandma's conservative. He's not an Orthodox conservative any more than Donald Trump is. He's more of a renegade and or a populist. But it seems that the Lord has determined that we are going to go through a silly season. Basically, there's been a wave of populist rebellion against the respectable mainstream. Donald Trump is an example of it. Bolsonaro in the new president of Brazil is another example, and now Boris Johnson. Probably the thing, and as with Donald Trump, Boris Johnson is not a stalwart representative of godliness. He's not. He's whatever it is. He's not that. But he's now the Prime Minister of the UK, and here's I think the first thing that we can look forward to. The first thing that I think is going to be notable in his administration, and that is the Brexit exit from the European Union is it now appears going to happen. So what happened was the referendum mandating a Brexit, which surprised pretty much everybody, including Theresa May, who was not a fan, didn't want to do it, but was then responsible for executing this mandate, leave the European Union. Well, because she wasn't a firm believer, she wanted to nuance her way out of the European Union, and that gave away all her negotiating leverage to the bureaucrats in Brussels, where the headquarters of the European Union is located. So that meant basically she could be played, and she tried to nuance her way out of the European Union because all the responsible people, were prophesying dire things if it were not done in the most nuanced, respectable way possible. So, consequently, she kept negotiating these deals, which were turned down by Parliament. Parliament refused to approve them. She was not able to negotiate a deal with the European Union. What Boris Johnson is committed to is what's called a hard Brexit. In other words, leaving by a certain date, whether there's an agreement or not. Now, if you have a hard Brexit, everybody, all the responsible people are prophesying doom and gloom for the UK if that happens. But what's likely to happen is I think it's going to be an explosion of prosperity on the UK side. And Boris Johnson is willing to do that, which means that he's willing for a hard Brexit, which means that he immediately has all the negotiating leverage that Theresa May did not have. So, as Christians, as we're watching these things, we can, both with Donald Trump and now with Boris Johnson, one of the things we should remind ourselves of is this: God draws straight with crooked lines. And what God is doing is not necessarily something that we get to do. God is, I think, being kind to us and unraveling all sorts of aspects of the administrative state, all kinds of regulations, all kinds of things that we did not deserve to have wadded up and thrown away, are being wadded up and thrown away to our great blessing. So, what does this mean? Well, what does this mean? It means that Christians ought to retain their integrity, hold on to their heart. They should not become a Donald Trump fanboy, nor should they become a Boris Johnson fanboy. But I think we can be, and must be, fans of what God is doing. When I think it was, well, I won't go down that road. I'll just put it this way. We can rejoice in the good things that are done, however God has arranged for them to be done. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should resort to Machiavellian tactics and embrace an approach that says the end justifies the means. But it does mean that we ought to be, rather than condemning Trump, and we'll have plenty of new opportunities to condemn Johnson as well, rather than doing that, we ought to ask ourselves, why is it that these ungodly men were able to keep promises better than all the godly ones? Just asking.
Oh, whether we will be God.
So, hamartiology. Apeithes occurs 6 times in the New Testament, and it's rendered by the word disobedient. Apeithes is rendered by the word disobedience, Apeithes. Zacharias was promised that his son John would be used to turn the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. That's in Luke 1:17. When the Lord appeared to Saul of Tarsus, he was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. That's in Acts 26:19. In his list of great evils at the conclusion of Romans 1, Paul included the fact that such people are disobedient to their parents. That's Romans 1:30. He does the same thing in his list of sins in 2 Timothy 3:2. And false teachers are both abominable and disobedient. Titus 1:16. But lest anyone put on airs before Christ called us to himself, we were all that way. Titus 3:3. We were all, like the others, disobedient. And this means that Christ died for people who had gone the wrong way, who had done what they were told not to do, who had disobeyed when God had told them to obey. We were all in that position. We were all, like sheep, gone astray. We were disobedient.
God don't never change.
So my book review this time being episode 103 in the Plodcast, My book review is a book called Boys in the Boat by a gent named Brown. This is a book that my wife and I listened to together on Audible. The production of it is quite good. We had an event over in Seattle, and so we listened to the book on the way over, and then on the way back. And then I think we had like 45 minutes left on the book after we got home, and had to drive around and finish the book that way. I think that's what we did. Anyway, The Boys in the Boat. The Boys in the Boat is about the rowing, the U.S. Olympic rowing team that hailed out of the University of Washington in 1936. And it basically gives the backstory of all these young men who came to row for the University of Washington, and how they rowed their way to a championship and then were selected to row in the 1936 Olympics hosted by Hitler in Berlin. And it's a gripping story. And there are all sorts of fun details in it, sort of Depression era backstory where these hard luck kids came from. They weren't refined. They weren't an Ivy League rowing team. They were, workers with their hands, rough farm boy types, and they were honed into this great. A great unit. There's a thing in there. Well, I'll just a few things about it. This is most of it is set in the Pacific Northwest where I live. In fact, when Nancy and I were driving over to Seattle listening to this, the book mentions Stevens Pass, which is a pass going it's to the north of Snoqualmie Pass. And we were taking that route. And we drove over Stevens Pass, and then just a few seconds later, the book mentioned the main character being at Stevens Pass, and that's fun. Also, the author describes this sensation that rowers have called the swing, and basically it's when all the members of everyone in the shell, the boat is called a shell, everyone in the crew is in perfect harmony. They're all in sync. They're all in the zone, and that's called the swing. And in this swing, they're just in this it's an ecstatic experience. My father was a graduate of the Naval Academy, class of 1950, and he rowed for Navy. And in fact, he rowed a few years. This was just a few years after the events in this book, but he rowed in the regatta at Poughkeepsie the last time it was held there. That was a problem because it was rowing on the river, and there was the luck of the draw on where what lane you had and whatever. But my father, who loves the Lord and has been an evangelist for many decades, said that rowing and particularly that experience of swing, as he described it, is the next best thing to Christianity. So, if you want to be immersed in a wonderful description of that kind of competition, that kind of training, that kind of life, The Boys in the Boat would be just a marvelous read. It's a marvelous book, wonderful book. I commend it heartily. One last thing: after you finish the book, you can go on YouTube and Google up the the final race that is described in the book in Berlin, where they've got it on film, and it's just with no spoilers, but it's just great. The people gave the Americans the lousiest lane. They didn't hear the starting gun. One of their key rowers was deathly ill with the flu and was laid up in the boat. Anyway, it's a nail biter. Get it. You'll enjoy it.
God don't never change. He's God.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.